Good afternoon. My name is Zoe, and I'm the Lived Experience Lead at Finding North Network. And today we are having the session Finding My North with our wonderful member, Paul. And I just want to welcome him to this session. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Before that, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the country throughout Australia and their continuing connection to the land, sea, and community. I'm connecting today on the lands of the Yagara and Turrbal people, and I pay my respects to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people around Australia. I also really want to take the opportunity to recognize those with lived and living experiences of mental health conditions. It's really important because your preferences, wishes, needs, and aspirations are at the heart of what Finding North Network does. And your perspective is essential to defining and achieving our goals. And your courage continues to inspire and drive the work that we do. Lastly, this conversation may contain topics such as mental health distress. Please continue at your own discretion and take care should any uncomfortable feeling arises. So welcome, Paul. I am so excited for this session.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to come in and have a chat. It's an honour and a privilege, and as I like to describe myself these days, I'm very much a lived and living experience pirate, but a pirate in a good way, in terms of someone who wants to confront the establishment and bring about the right changes. I suppose I'd like to start by, and I'm going to read, I was fortunate enough last week to be at the Equally Well 2023 symposium in Sydney, and Rose Jackson, the New South Wales Minister for Mental Health, was there. And I'm just going to read something that she put up, which was just so, it resonated so strongly with me. And it goes like this: facts are important, truth is important, research is important, but people telling their story are the most powerful pathways and change agents. And that just resonated so strongly with me in terms of that we have some fantastic research out there, we have some fantastic people out there, but we just don't hear enough from the people who are living and have this lived experience in their lives to help shape the policy, to help shape the community informed approach to supporting. Because the one thing that I've learned, whether it's mental health, suicide, chronic health, disability, none of it discriminates, and so we all have some skin in the game. So before I start, I just wanted to acknowledge the custodians of the land, past, present, and future, but also acknowledge that I want to talk about what may be discomforting for some, may be confronting for some. However, I'm about being real. I'm about making a difference. And most importantly, to use my favourite terms, I'm about trying to normalise these conversations, whether it's about mental health, whether it's about suicide prevention, whether it's about childhood sexual abuse, whether it's about disability, or whether it's about chronic health. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I have lived and living experience across all of those things. So for me, that's what I'm about. That's why I'm a pirate. That's why I'm about making a difference. And that's why I use the term over and over, and you'll get tired of me saying it. It's about normalizing this conversation. And a perfect example is, last week we unfortunately lost Sinead O'Connor, which was, a very tragic passing. But what was also disappointing was the fact that the way they reported her death. We had to fill in the blanks to assume, which is a terrible thing to do, that she died by taking her own life. The only insight we had was that the passing of her 17-year-old son. So why can't we? Why don't we normalise these conversations? It is a fact of life. Life does not discriminate, as I said, whether it's mental health, whether it's suicide. And I know there's lots of debates on either side, but again, this is just my own personal experience. Talking about it actually helps me. It's actually quite cathartic for me. And if I put on the male hat, we're wanting to encourage males. to open up. We're wanting to encourage males to talk more. So if we don't normalize that conversation, then it's going to be very, very, very hard. And we spend, tens of billions of dollars every year on mental health, but yet mental health still spiraled out of control. Suicide is still spiraling out of control. So to me, we just need to normalize these conversations. So that's why I'm very privileged to be here to be able to talk about that. So.
Thank you so much, Paul. I think it's really interesting when you talk about the reporting of suicide and how that's changed over the years in media. They don't actually tell you that it is someone taking their own life anymore. You can still find out by reading the context or make those assumptions, which is not the best thing. However, there is this assumption now, isn't it, that if you actually put the word someone died by suicide or took their own life, that it gives people a notion that, an opportunity, or that they will want to take that. And I think that's a really, I'm really confused about that. But giving people an idea means that people will take their own life, and we're trying to bury things under, like you said, and I think normalizing it is the way to go. But it must be really, really uncomfortable for people who don't have these conversations like you and me all the time, to talk about these things or bring awareness of these things. What do you think of that?
Look, I totally agree, and it's frustrating from someone who lives on that side of the tracks. Is that, and there's enough research out there now that actually states that talking about suicide isn't going to prompt someone to actually go through that plan. It may put the thought in their head, but if we go back to the 4 basic questions when it comes to suicide, question 1, are you suicidal? 2, do you have a plan? 3, do you have resources? 4, are you going to act on that? I mean, I operate with a yes to all 3, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The weekend that's just gone was, I was, again, it's going to be confronting for some, but I'm about being real. I was very close to ending my life. I was at my wit's end. I will get emotional because that's me, because that's about being real. And I struggled as to who to reach out to, but we'll come to that further down the chat. So, it isn't going to force me to do that, talking about it, because it's my situation. Everyone's situation is individual. We all have our own tipping points, our own breaking points, our own strength points, our own, areas that we struggle with. So the mere fact that we don't talk about it makes me feel bad, because I don't want to be a burden to people, because that's what it conjures up for me, is that because we don't talk about it and I go and talk to someone, I then feel like a burden. And it also puts people in a difficult situation where they don't know how to talk about it. So again, it's just normalizing the conversation. If we're not talking about it, then we're not helping people. We're not training people to actually have these very difficult conversations, but really critical conversations. I mean, if I walked in today and I had a cast on my arm, everyone would go, "Oh, what happened, Paul? Oh, I broke my arm. Oh, tell me all about it. Yeah. Oh, can I sign your cast?" If I walked in and my shirt said, "Hi, I'm feeling suicidal," everyone would go, "Whoa, back away. We don't want to talk." Oh, that's, why? It's because we've built this cocoon, this dome around the concept, the word. But as I said, it doesn't discriminate. It's also the misconception again about suicide, that if someone's suicidal, they have a mental health issue. No. Yes, that is a component of it, but it's not the component of it. The person can be quite rationally sane, as in not suffering a mental illness, and maybe suffering mental health. And again, there's a big differentiation between those two. But their life situations may have just pushed them to the edge, and unfortunately, they may take that next step. Because of the burden, we don't want to talk about it. Absolutely. Because people are uncomfortable. I did an assist training program a couple of years ago, and I was very comfortable talking about it, but it really hit me hard how people really struggle to actually ask those words. Are you feeling suicidal? And people really struggle to do that. So again, how do we get people to talk about these things? We've got Are You Okay Day, which is great, but we do it 1 day a week. And from
do you
yes,
think, I just wanted to ask that question that just came up. It's when you said people were quite reactive or quite hard in, asking that question. what do you think can help them? Because the truth is, I've experienced something similar when I'm quite open talking about it, but people are very, do you think that it's because if that person asks that question, that they will feel a sense of responsibility to do something about it? And they don't know how to, so it's easier not to ask that question. Those are just thoughts that popped up.
But
I
I
would.
can't answer that from the point of view that I'm not inside each person's head. So everyone's going to react differently. I would say that it's because it is one of those taboo subjects that we don't talk about. That's why they're uncomfortable. It was a 2-day training program. By the end of it, people were actually comfortable having that conversation, and it was practice over and over and over, asking that first question. You can't get to question 2, 3, and 4 unless you ask that first
Very
one.
first question, yeah.
You might come across someone who's standing on a bridge. What do? Did you just walk past? Did you just ignore? No, you want to help. And as I said, are you okay, Dave? I answer yes, because that's what people want to hear. But what if I said no? I'm actually feeling very suicidal. People don't know what to do. It's because we don't have these conversations. We don't normalize these conversations. We're not equipping people to have these conversations. So for me, the more we talk about it, and yes, it's always going to be hard. Change is always hard. But if it's changed for the right reasons, that we're actually equipping people, we're normalizing the conversation, everyone's got skin in the game, it is a community responsibility. We all know someone or know of someone who has lost someone to suicide, or has people who are, battling those thoughts. We've all got to have the skills to be able to have that conversation.
We really need to be equipped. I think this really should be equipped. We should be equipping the next generation from an educational perspective. Nowadays in school, they're talking about, your mental health, your physical health, what was it, your social health, and all these type of areas, but still mental health is still talked about, well-being, and that focus.
It's whispered in the corridors. We don't talk out loud to it. It's like it's and I know me. I go off on tangent, but
I love
it's like the debate we're having right now about borderline personality, which is one of the things I struggle with, and we want to change it, or they want to change it to emotionally unstable personality disorder. Well, really, I don't know how being labeled emotionally unstable is going to make me feel better. I don't understand how changing the label, as they call it, is actually going to help me in any way. Wow. So again, it's these discrete conversations that we have without actually talking to the real people. So again, that's a very select conversation that's held by the clinical side, and their rebuttal is that it's personified. And I suggest that's because it's the actual word borderline personality has been Hollywoodized. It's portrayed poorly through the movies out there. We're not all serial killers, psychopaths, blah blah blah. It is, again, it is a mental illness, but it's an illness that is the result of something else. And I think if we go right back to where my story started. I mean, I look at my life as a linear equation. From 0 to 11, I was the typical sort of Adonis out there. A young boy full of dreams and hopes, and running through the bush chasing butterflies and riding my horse and doing all those things. That was a normal period. The next stage of my life was from 11 to 13, where I was horrendously sexually, physically, and emotionally abused by a number of Christian brothers across all of those years. That then set the platform for what the rest of my life was going to look like. So from 13 to 48 was, I call, my sort of lost years, where I was in self-denial. My brain, my vagus nervous system, everything was just shutting down, going, we can't cope with this. That was the defensive mechanism. So out of that childhood abuse came the trauma. From that trauma came the mental health, and then the physical health, which was a subsequent disclosure path as a consequence of that. So, we don't want to talk about childhood sexual abuse. We don't want to talk about suicide. Well, they're all part of this linear equation, which then sort of led to 48 was when I was able to actually have the conversation. For me, it was about being able to say, get out of my self-denial and actually use the word, I am a victim of childhood sexual abuse, which now I can say, I still get a bit choky, but back then I would actually be in tears now. My legs would be shaking and my brain would just go, okay, we need to shut down now. We need to shut down. But I had to get to that point. It's a bit like, hi, my name's Paul, I'm an alcoholic. No, I'm not. But that's the first step of AA. Until I acknowledge what is happening, what has happened, nothing's ever going to change. So for me, that was the beginning of my transformation. That was the beginning of my, and I'll come to it in a second for you, my finding my north in terms of, what was it all about? But I had to put a sunset clause on being at that victim stage. For me, I had to say, okay, I need to acknowledge this. I need to grieve. I need to get frustrated. I need to get angry. I need to ask all the questions, the what ifs, the hypotheticals, blah, 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 I needed to do that processing because I hadn't done that yet. Only until I'd done that with the sunset clause was I able to move into the survivor and the thriver stage. Now,
Yeah, I love that,
I
Paul.
need to put the caveat there that I continually fall back, but that's okay because that's the equation now. I understand the equation.
I love
Sorry.
that. No, don't. No, I was cutting you off. Sorry. I think I was just getting really excited because I think personally, my transformation has been somewhat similar, and I had a lot of trouble accepting that I was a victim per se in my life, and I always lived my life as the savior and the one who did everything, like and so then I twisted my brains, or my inside was really always asking the question, what's wrong with you? And it really wasn't until, like you said, I've acknowledged a lot of what has happened to me, and that I was wrongfully treated with, and some of these traumatic experiences, where I was able to accept that. And like you said, I really, really like the sunset clause because, during the acceptance, for my personal stage of going through accepting that I was a victim, it was particularly hard for me, and because being such a warrior, or whatever people used to call me, being that person, that sunset clause really makes me feel comfortable because I need to accept it, but I also need to put it in the past and move along in my future, and really own into who I want to be, and not forever be in that perspective or that perception. I'm not saying everybody has to do that, but I really like the sunset clause.
And yeah, it is that healing transformation. I will never forgive and I will never forget what has happened. But I know in my own mind, I was not going to move forward until I actually did that acknowledgement and said I was there. And the real breakthrough was that I was actually starting to able to have these conversations with myself. And I'll go off onto that tangent saying, when I first came across you guys at a conference last year, I spent some time going, so what is finding my north? So I do what everyone else does. We go into Dr. Google and say, finding my north, what does that mean to me? What does finding my north mean? And all I got was compasses. I'm like, I know what a bloody compass is. I know where north is. That's not helping me. But it made me really try and just look internally, which again was part of my transformation, was being able to be reflective, which I couldn't do until I had acknowledged what had happened to me. So it was about discovering my authentic self. I write in a book that I'm trying to write about myself. I quite often use the phrase, would the real Paul Klotz please stand up? Because I don't know, and I didn't know who I was. If I look at the borderline personality, if I look at the major depressive order, the bipolar, the dissociative identity disorder, the complex trauma, there is one hell of a mixed up person inside. And one of the phrases I use is, when talking to me, please bring the bomb squad. And people go, what do you mean by the bomb squad? I said, well, when you understand me, and this is just me, I'm literally a time bomb waiting to go off. Because when you look at the mental health and the physical health, which hopefully we'll get time to talk about, the lack of correlation, the lack of morbidity that exists between those two, it really is just a matter of time before someone like myself was going to explode. And that happened on 12 occasions throughout my life. The last one was in 2015. It was my 12th and final suicide attempt, touch wood. I woke up in the mental ward after a couple of days and did the normal thing, bloody hell, you useless mongrel thing. You can't even do that right. All that self-deprecation that we do, because that's what we've been conditioned to do. That's what, in my case, that's what the abusers had conditioned me to think, that it was my fault, it was my shame, it was my guilt, it was my fault, blah, blah. But it's when the merging of all of those things started to really make sense for me. It's when a number of my personalities, my alters, came to me and said, listen, mate, for a highly intelligent man, you're pretty bloody stupid, aren't you? I beg your pardon. Well, you'd think after 12 times, someone always finds you. Do you not realize it's not your time? It's obviously not your time to go. You've got things to do. And that's when it sort of really made sense to me. Okay, well, if it's not my time to go, I've got to work out what my purpose is. My purpose to me was using all of the lived and living experience that I have to be that pirate, to be that person that stands up to the silly norms and to look at the health system and the failings that we've got, and trying to be the voice, not only for myself, but for other people out there. So it all loops back in, and it's been a long journey, 8-9 years before I really understood what finding my north was. And as I said, it was about being authentic, understanding what my purpose was, but on running in parallel was understanding what my beliefs were, what my values are, what's really important to me, letting go of some of those things. And you published an article on Finding North Network yesterday or today about imposter syndrome. Well, I just went, yep, that's me, because that was part of it. But that's helped me understand. This journey's helped me understand why I'd had what I would call a reasonably successful corporate life, but kept moving every couple of years because of that self-imposter, that lack of self-belief, that lack of acknowledging that you're doing a good job, that you're a fraud, that someone's going to find out, which was not the truth. So it was about looking at the values that are really important to me and the beliefs that are important to me, and understanding that, whose opinion matters most? Mine. And that's not being arrogant, but that's saying, hey, I've spent, those first 55 years worrying about what everyone else said, because that, again, was part of it. That was part of understanding how the childhood abuse led to the trauma, and how that trauma developed, your fight, flight, freeze, but also, most importantly, the fawn. So for me, it was about fawning, appeasing everyone. And so it all started to help me understand. And when I was diagnosed with borderline personality, it was like, oh, everyone's got, my God. I said, no, it's actually good. Forget the label. I always say labels are for containers, not for people. So let's get over that. It's about looking and understanding what borderline personality was, the symptoms. And it went, oh my God, it was that light bulb moment when all of those dumb things I said, did all those years ago now makes sense to me. Doesn't forgive them, doesn't excuse them, but I can actually now put it into context. And that, again, was part of my transformation. That, again, is part of my finding my north, was actually coming to peace to say, okay, I'm now putting the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together now, that I'm actually understanding who I am. Not perfect, not completely broken, although most of the time I do feel like I'm still broken, but that's a different conversation. But it was actually allowing me to actually start. You feel like I've got an empty easel, and I'm now starting to draw what the real Paul Klotz does look like. So it was about looking at that, what I value most in life.
Paul, can
And so
I
if
ask you a question?
sorry, yeah.
Um, you
I
talked
suffer verbal diarrhea, so you got to interject, because I'll just go on and on.
Yeah, I just always need to. It's just, for those who will watch this video, last time I had this conversation with Paul, I was like so bummed that I didn't record it. So this time I'm like, we're just recording and we'll go everywhere. I don't care if this goes for 2 hours, because it's so amazing. You talked about finding your own values and what your purpose is in life. One of the things that I've really found challenging for me personally with, like you said, the abuse, the mental illness, conditions, whatever names we want to do it, all those things mixed up together, and also masking my entire life and living to other people's expectations. I found that it was very, very hard to figure out what my own values was. And I'm sure that many people will have those when they're really learning to find their authentic and genuine self and looking for their own values. What helped you through this process with ripping away what you thought was, what values were actually from other people and what were actually truly yours?
Again, it's that reflective process. It was for me to look at a minute, and I went online and said, give me a list of values, because I thought, what is a value? So I just sort of looked at all these different words and went, okay, yeah, I'm a bit of this, bit of that. Yeah, okay. But then what was important to me? So, and I did a lot of reading of Daniel Goleman about emotional intelligence, again, because I had an exceptionally high IQ, but I had no EQ. So
Mm.
really trying to understand that side of it. And it's then that I realized that part of EQ is the empathy side of it, but there is an extension to that actually there's a complete separate part to empathy, as that I realized that I'm a true empath, that I actually feel my own, but I actually feel other people.
Other
So
people.
that's when it says what's important to me is actually helping other people. So it's a little bit altruistic. So in a way, that's a value. It's about having that conversation with myself to say what's important. And I often use the phrase, do unto others as you wish them to do unto you. If I treat you like a dog, don't be surprised if you get bitten. But hey, how would you feel if someone said or did that to you? Well, I'd feel terrible. Okay, so if you would feel terrible, why would you do that to someone else? Well, I wouldn't. And then I took that one step further and said, okay, so if you're not prepared to do it to someone else, why are you prepared to do it to yourself? So
Oh,
again, that became such a reflective moment for me to go, okay, I've got to control this self-talk. So from those, what I call very simple, reflective and basic conversations that I had with myself, that then started to develop what are the things that are important to me. And it's about being true to myself, but then extending that true to the community.
I
What's
love
important
that.
to me is the fact that my life was severely changed because of the abuse. So what's important to me is to is that protective process. So I don't want others to go through it, but I also don't want others to go through the self-denial for as long as I did. So for me, it's about being authentic and getting out there, getting off the sideline and getting into the game, as I often say, is to say, how do I help bring about these changes? So it is about being real. It's about being authentic. It's about being a true empath. So, yeah, I then just started to slowly, just play with all these different terms and go, okay, what are the key ones that really mean the most to me? And it's about reflective. It's about being honest. It's about being real. It's about being the empath. And it's about giving back
I love that.
in terms of my living experience. So, and everyone's journey is going to be very different because we are individuals and our experiences are individual, and the way we react. I mean, unfortunately, I have a high tolerance to pain, which is not a good thing, but that's helped me to be stronger. One of my values is that I acknowledge that I am a very resilient person to have gone through what I've gone. And for the audience out there, they still don't know much about me, but on the physical side of it, we've already briefly touched on the mental side, but I'm a great believer that the relationship between trauma and therefore mental health, that it branches out in, but the physical health, my body was running on cortisol, still does run on cortisol with the tap open the whole time. That's why I've had a heart attack. That's why I've had a stroke. That's why I've still got an aneurysm on the left-hand side of my brain. It's why I've had cancer 4 times, 3 different types of cancer. It's why I've got diverticulitis, pancreatitis, and irritable bowel syndrome, which led to my bowel perforating 18 months ago and lost most of my bowel. It's why I've got functional neurological disorder and epilepsy, and I could go on and on. All of these things, I'm a great believer, are a result of the trauma, of how my body did or did not react to it, did not cope with it, which I then take back to the health system. So for me, it's about being the pirate, to go back to the health system and say, hey, if we could just recognize, acknowledge, and intervene in a preventative mode rather than a reactive mode, because that's what we spend so much of our time is on the post-vention side of it. And I'll give you a classic example is that, 12 years ago, I had my right shoulder reconstructed. The left one needed to be done as well, but I was living on the streets, and so it wasn't feasible for me to get it done at the time. It's been delayed and waiting lists. So what should have been just a very, 1 hour minor shoulder reconstruction, I'm now faced with having a total reverse shoulder replacement. and my left shoulder and left arm is basically useless. Most of the day I'm in tears from the pain. But if we had intervened properly at the time, I wouldn't have had to suffer so much. The health system wouldn't have had to suffer so much for me having to go into hospital all the time because my shoulder dislocates all the time by itself or with night seizures, etc. There are so many, broader impacts that it has from a GDP, economic, but also, well-being perspective. So again, it's that pirate that says I've got to raise the skull and bones flag out there. I've got to be the storyteller. I've got to be out there. And it's not something that's easy to do. As I said, it's only in the last, 18 months, 2 years that I've found my voice to be strong and not fall apart. It doesn't mean that I don't beat myself up because I really think, well, who are you to talk about these things? And I have all those conversations, but I'm comfortable because I'm now managing those things. I know I'm going right off on tangents, different stages, but come back to the personalities. I'm aware of those things, and I have names for all of them. And I've gone from the back seat into the front seat, and I'm actually in the driving seat now because we're actually working together rather than your personality is doing one thing and you being oblivious to it all. And there are times when I disassociate totally and I have no idea what's happening, but we're actually harnessing and working together, which makes me a stronger person, which makes me a better person being able to talk about these things. So again, see, I'm trying to normalize the conversation here. We wouldn't want to talk about these things previously, but hey, if I don't start, then no one's going to start. Absolutely. It's that pebble in the pond. It's and it's not being brave. It's just being real. It comes back to the values. What's important to me? Helping other people who cannot speak for themselves or are too afraid to speak for themselves to actually start these conversations, because I know how isolated and alone and lonely I am. So I'm just one of, in Australia, hundreds of thousands that are living like this, and there's no point. So that brings it all back to, why do I want to be here? Which then leads to those suicidal thoughts that we have. So I know I go off on tangents. My brain does that. It sort of gets all excited and goes different places. But
I
it's
love
all
these
interlinked.
tangents. It is. It's the intersectionality of things, isn't it? My physical health, your physical health, and your mental health and my mental health. It's not siloed. It's not separated. When you're in physical pain and you're in excessive pain all the time, your mental health will suffer through it. It's really not. So many things are interrelated. And I joke with my family nowadays that I'm like, when you guys get sick, you have a cold, I end up going into hospital or going on steroids. And what's the biggest difference between them and me? I'm actually live the most healthier lifestyle out of all of them. I exercise, I sleep, I eat well, and I try everything, and everything. Yet in these put all three of us in the I will always be the one that will get the hard side of it. And I truly believe that it's because of all the trauma that I was unable to process when I was young. And that's why I've had so much health issues my entire life. And it wasn't really until I looked into childhood trauma to actually understand that, because I've been beating myself up my entire life saying, somebody gets a cold and they can go to work and they can take some Codral. Here I am going to a GP, getting steroids, getting ear infections and getting chest infections where I have to go to be hospitalized over something that was just a bug for someone else. Why? And that spiral that you go into every time it happens, and it really translated into my confidence and a lot of the imposter syndrome that I was talking about in a workplace, because someone gets sick and they can go to work. When I get sick, sometimes I have to take a week off because of how sick I actually get, and all these things that people don't talk about. So thank you so much for sharing and being so vulnerable and being so real. I think it's interesting how we say that when people share these things, like we have these conversations, people are like, oh my goodness, you are so brave, you are so courageous, when we actually have these conversations not because we're brave or courageous, because really it's not really a choice for us anymore when we get to this particular point, is it? At least I don't think so. I always, I've always seen a lot of advocates share their stories in the past, and I've always quite, first of all, here we go, imposter syndrome again, ashamed for not having the courage to say things. And eventually one day in my life, I just decided I can't. And I think that it's amazing that some of us have come to this stage where we can do that. But I'm also very aware that some people might never get to that or don't ever want to get to that. And I think that's also important to acknowledge, because not everyone has the privileges that we have to have a platform like this or also want to actually share.
And it's important to acknowledge those people that don't want to share, that's okay. It's, I often think of, when I reflect on this, it's a bit like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. According to that, it's all about self-actualization, blah, blah, blah. But if you look at that from a work experience, if you look at that from a life experience, if you reach the top, there's only space for one CEO. We can't have 10 CEOs. We may all want to aspire to that, but reality says there's only place for one. We still need people at every layer down below. We still need people to count the paper clips, to drive the taxis, deliver the pizza, to tend to the roads, the gardens. And if that is their pinnacle in life, if that is their total contentment, there's nothing wrong with that. But yet we spend a lot of our time in society always saying that we can do anything we want. Well, yeah, potentially we can, but do we want to? And it's a bit like the conversation that I had with myself. One of my values and beliefs is about contentment, finding that level of contentment. We tend to be pushed to be, we have that word happiness thrust down our throats. Now, I think I used the analogy last time we spoke was, I can wake up happy, get out of bed and kick my toe. I'm no longer happy, but I can still be content.
Absolutely.
One of the most contented periods I had was when I was living on the streets, because it gave me the time to reflect on what was important to me, which then allowed me to build the dashboard that I use in my own life now is about, and it's what again drove me into being the pirate. Is that when I looked at all the times I was in and out of mental wards, all they ever did, all our health system did was look at the mental aspect. And I got the stage after months of being in there that I knew what to say to the psychiatrist to get out of there. I needed to get out of there. So I just tell them all the things I need to hear and how to go, knowing full well that in a month's time, a week's time, I could probably be back in there because the other areas of my contentment weren't in place. So there's the mental, there's the emotional side of it, there's the physical side of it, the social, the spiritual, and the financial side of it. So for me, that's my little dashboard that I have implanted across my brain there to say, where am I at with those things? And it's a bit like the stock exchange. It's sort of up and down all over the place. But I know that when they start to redline, when I hit that bankruptcy point across all of them, then I know that I've got to reach out for help, because I am standing on the precipice of the cliff. But I'm also being able to acknowledge that contentment can be that I've got 3 or 4 of those in balance, the other 2 are out of balance. That's called life. That's okay. But it's allowed me a framework for me to, again, be reflective internally. What's important to me? Years ago, the fiscal side was very important because, I was married, I have 4 beautiful sons, so that was really important. But that comes with its own tags and challenges there. I now live on a disability support pension, and I'm okay with that. I'm actually content. I'm earning, probably a 50th of what I used to earn, but I don't care because I now know what's real, what's valuable to me. So I have within that dashboard, I know what contentment looks like on the physical side of it: mental, social, physical, emotional, spiritual. So I've got this dashboard that I can actually use. So contentment was a real key stepping stone for me to achieve and being able to understand that. The challenge is to get society, to get the health system to actually have those conversations. So again, normalizing the conversation, I told you I'd come back to it, is that, if I'm going to the hospital, if I'm seeing a doctor, if I'm seeing any clinician, they need to be having that mental health conversation with me, but they also need to be having those other conversations. So what's happening in your physical life, socially, what's happening? spiritually? How do you feel about yourself? How do you feel about society? Because there could be events and triggers in there that I'm just not comfortable with, but I'm not sharing because no one's talking to me. What's happening on the emotional side? Well, I'm feeling quite disconnected from my sons at the moment. Okay, so how is that? They're all interlinked, but we have all these conversations in isolation. I spent all my year in my working life in the IT and telco land, and to use that language, they're all disparate databases, but none of them talk to each other. So what's the point of all that data? It's not being shared. So again, that's part of the pirate thing, is that how do we get that? Those conversations are starting to happen, but I do get frustrated as to how quickly we can have those things. I was lucky enough to work on a project with the Queensland government, the SRAM ED program, which is about training all the staff in the emergency department on how to deal with people who present with mental health or suicide ideation. Now, that's a big step forward, because I know from my own personal experience, I would go to the hospital. I'd go to the hospital late at night because I'm in danger. I know that I am a danger to myself. And, one particular time I was there, waiting there for a couple of hours, went up and sort of just politely said, look, I don't want to be a pain, sorry, but do you know how much longer it's going to be before I can get to see someone? To be rebuked with, you do realize there are people here with serious health issues. I was like, wow, I actually don't matter or count, do I? Okay, great. So what was your problem again? Oh, I'm feeling suicidal. Sorry, I couldn't hear. So I then had to say out loud, I'm feeling suicidal. Of course, the rest of the waiting room hears that. So how does that make me feel? So I then politely left the emergency ward, and later that night tried to end my life. So it was like, wow, people, these are real events. This is what's happening because we're not connecting the dots. We're not putting the two together the same. If someone presents with a health issue, there could be an underlying mental problem that's actually driving that health issue. So we need to have that joint conversation. We need to change the philosophy that our public health system is geared towards physical health. Mental health is an afterthought. I know we're talking about huge systemic changes, but if we're not having these conversations now, it's never going to happen. If we're not having people who are prepared to speak up and say, this is reality. This is about being real. That this is what happens, and it's happened to me on quite a few occasions. And it's not about poor Paul. It's got nothing to do with that. It's not about getting people to feel sorry for me. It's about people getting to understand me and who I represent in the community, because I'm just a token of so many other people out there that don't have the courage, don't have the strength, or maybe through disabilities, don't have the verbal skills to be able to talk about these things. So unless, again, we start normalizing these conversations, we don't have all the clinicians out there actually thinking along these lines, then our problem's only going to get worse, and we're going to be pumping more money. So from an economic perspective, we've spent $10 billion in the last 12 months on mental health. Where's it got us? We're actually going backwards, unfortunately. I'm not trying to be, this is not a political statement, but I just don't feel we're having the right conversations. It's a bit like having lived experience. We talk about co-design. It's one of the new bingo buzzwords out there, but there are so many definitions of what co-design is. Where is co-production, co-concept? And then afterwards, after we've designed it, where is the involvement of the people with living experience throughout that entire process there? I mean, that's how we bring about real sustainable change. That's how we get those people's voices into the policies. Sorry, I'm off on my tangents again.
No, this is the point of these conversations.
I know.
Paul.
This is the self-imposter coming in going, we don't want to do it.
No, I love it. I love it.
But this is real. I mean, I'm being real. I feel very, as you probably tell, I'm very passionate about this, but I also get the other side of the coins going, you're talking too much, shut up. You probably intimidate people. So this is a battle that we all have, that I have on a daily basis. But again, if I don't talk about it, if people don't see it, hear it, feel it, then how are we going to get that true holistic groundswell to bring about the right sort of changes? How are we going to help educate the people in triage? So if you present to the emergency department, this is what this training program was, to actually help these people understand what it's like, and therefore change the way we triage people that come into emergency departments. I may come in with a physical ailment, but that could be because of the underlying mental health issues, the mental illnesses issues that are out of control, but I'm too embarrassed or too afraid to talk about it because they might not believe me. They'll just move me straight to the mental ward. They'll put me on more drugs and all of those things without just saying, hey, it's me, it's part of me. It's actually part of my holistic transformation process. It's a part of my, self-care plan. We should be having these conversations.
Yeah, you talked about your boundaries, and your little exchange thing. And I think about how this conversation brings me back to one of the conversations I've had with one of my brain coaches a while ago during COVID. And it was because I have something similar. I have my emotional, social, love, financial, career, and all those things. And I have my own, I guess, boundaries on what is healthy and when it's going down to the red. And I've done this because I've done a lot of work for my mental health. And so when we were going through the beginning of COVID, I was having this conversation with my psychologist. We don't call her a psychologist at home because there's a bit of a stigma in there, and my daughter felt that. But now I have to rewind and tell you why. So my daughter was going through some stuff at school, and to a point where I was a bit worried, and I asked, would you like to, I think you maybe consider seeing a counselor at school? And of course, like a typical teenager, no, that's not cool. They can't help anyway, because they just send you off to other people, and they're not really qualified anyway, and just those conversations. And so, okay, so if you don't want to have this sort of assistance in school, let's consider going outside to see an external psychologist. She goes, no, Mum, I'm not a psycho. And I just went, what? Where did that come from? And I'm like, where did that come from? And so, and this is literally what she said as a 12-year-old. She said, well, Mum, it is actually in the word. And I just went, oh my goodness, it is in the word. And so I had to sit down with her and actually said, okay, you know that your mom have been seeing a psychologist for many, many years. Do you think that I'm a psycho? And she said, no. And goes, so where did that come from? But that was her initial reaction. And when we sat down and actually had a talk, she was like, oh, and I explained to her, a psychologist is basically, I go, and I drew a piece of paper with lots of colors. And I go, this is my brain at the moment. I've got 11 colors, 200 dots and different things. And I go, seeing a psychologist helps me put them in line so I can see them clearer. And so we decided to call a psychologist brain coach because they're essentially coaching me tools and skills that I can use. But going back there, it's during the COVID period, my brain coach actually said to me, there are lots of everyday people who do not have mental illness or who have not regularly seen psychologists who are really, really struggling because they don't have these reflective tools to know when they need to seek help. And so where was I going? See, now I'm going on off a tangent.
No.
Yeah, but it's so important that we develop these reflective tools for ourselves to know, am I in the blues for a couple of weeks because something has triggered a response, with something, a life event has happened, or, is it, okay, this has been going on for 6 months and, I've got regular suicide ideation. I need to get assistance. Like, where do we put these marks for ourselves to know when we need to seek help, when we have the tools, or when we're confident in looking after ourselves. And these are things that people don't talk about. Like, what happens when you go to a GP, when you tell them that you're not doing well? They throw you a K10. And I've heard so many stories of teenagers just over answering these questions on purpose because they feel the need to seek help. And it's a big sign, isn't it, that if someone is choosing a higher score for particular things to seek help, that they do seek help. But there has to be something else in along these lines of having these conversations, aside going to a GP and telling them I'm not feeling mentally well, or presenting yourself to a hospital when you're having, having suicidal thoughts, which I've done before, and that has not ended well for me. And I've left as well because of some of the things that they've said. It's interesting.
But you've just done what I started. You actually sat down and normalized the conversation with your daughter. You were normalizing it. So she had a perception, that stigma, you psycho, blah, blah, blah. I mean, that's just a conditioning from society, from Hollywood to all sorts of other things out there. So it says to kids that we don't talk about those things, because I don't want to be seen as a psycho. I don't want to be seen as a weirdo, blah, whatever the label might be. But you actually sit down and normalize that conversation. That's the type of thing that we should be doing, but right across the board, is actually normalizing it so that it is not a big thing. I mean, the fact that she had that in her mind, it's, when you're talking, it just jumped into me, but going, hang on. I will go and see, if I was back in my sporting days, I would have a specialist sports coach and a dietitian and this and that. If I got a problem with my car, I go and see that specialist. If you're at school, you go and see a career coach or a career counselor or whatever. All those specialized areas within our life, it is the norm, and it's expected that you can go and talk to those people. So what's so different about the brain?
It's interesting, huh? There's
that
also
we don't.
Yeah. What about the flip side of it? Mental ill health and mental well-being is so talked about now that basically everybody's diagnosing each other, and basically, in high school particularly, I'm using a lot of my current living experiences. People saying, "Oh, I've got personality disorder," or "I've got bipolar," or "I've got depressive manic episode," etc., etc. Like, these are some of what's happening on the ground, with the young generation at the moment, without actually going to seek help, which is my biggest fear, is because they are obviously saying that they are using those identities or diagnoses. At the same time, they also feel like they don't want to reach out to professionals or whoever there are, because they don't trust them. Like, I find that is something, like, I'm quite concerned about that.
Yeah, and look, again, this is just my...
No, this is personal view. Whoever's watching, it's my personal concerns. It's just one point of view.
We're not equipping our kids with the right tools. And I go right back to emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence has 5 steps, according to Daniel Goleman. Acknowledge your emotions, manage your emotions, which brings out the empathy, which brings out your ability to motivate yourself, which then increases your social awareness and your social opportunities. Kids aren't being equipped to actually acknowledge and work out those emotions. As a society, we're too quick, and I'll be very politically angry that I'd put a lot of it on the pharmaceutical companies, because it's just easier to tell the doctors to put them on drugs. But the fact is, there is a real differentiation between mental illness and mental health. Mental health, mental well-being are normal parts of life. It's called evolution. It's called fight and flight, or freeze and fawn. But your basic fight and flight. If we're confronted with something, we go into fight and flight. That may breed stress, anxiety. Someone might pass away. That breeds grief. That is a normal emotion, and we should be equipping our kids to deal with those things and say it is okay to grieve for my granny who died, or my pet that died. Okay, grief is a normal emotion, and it is okay. Again, be the victim, be the griever, but put a sunset clause on it. But society seems to be gearing that we're just lumping it all under mental illness. Well, no, I've got bipolar. Yes, okay, bipolar is like borderline. All the symptoms need to be sustainable over a long period, not just a sporadic hit and miss. I'm sure most people could say that they're bipolar. They get focused on a project and just show, I just want to do it, and they will just stick to that project. They're not bipolar. They're motivated. They're enthused. They're committed. And then, yes, they'll come down, because that's just a natural high and low that goes through. But is that happening over 6 months, 12 months, 2 years? Is that a continuing thing? Or is it just, hey, I'm on a particular project that I'm completely passionate about, and I just jump in and do it? It's about then saying, okay, if you're doing those things, is that a healthy approach? So again, it's having this conversation. Is that a healthy approach? Is there a more subtle way to actually achieve the same thing, but do it in a less stressful environment for you. Mankind has evolved through stress and anxiety. We need stress and anxiety in our lives. That's how we define what's important to us, what our boundaries are, what is safe, what is hot, what is cold, what is good, what is bad. I mean, they're normal things. But my observation that I see is that it's all been just conveniently labeled under mental illness. And so mental illness then gets this bad rap, because then everyone's going to see, which then puts a strain on the health services. So as we know, we can't get to see psychologists, psychiatrists, counsellors, social workers. There's a huge wait list. So we go to GPs, we end up going to the emergency department. So it's putting a strain on all the health resources, where if we had these normal conversations, if parents and schools had these normal conversations, then, and equipping the kids to deal with those little highs and lows, because that's what we go through, then they'd be able to move forward. I just, as I said, my humble opinion is that we are over-diagnosing, we're over-complicating and oversimplifying by just, let's just put it all under mental illness. Let's just say you've got depression. No, you're sad. Sad is okay. It's sad to feel that you've broken up with your boyfriend or your girlfriend, or it's sad that you failed your exam, or you only got 80 out of 100 in your exam and you wanted more. That's okay, but acknowledge that emotion, process that emotion, and then use that emotion. I mean, I'll give you a little side example. Many years ago, I used to coach, cricket and soccer with my kids, and I remember when the kids would come off after being bowled, and they'd walk off, dragging the bat, feeling, oh, the world is hopeless, I'm hopeless, I suck at this, and I said, here you go, Johnny. He said, I feel like so tell me how you're feeling, and they'd sort of express what they were feeling inside. I go, okay, so do you like that emotion? No. Okay, so do you want to feel that? Do you want to experience that emotion again? No. I said, okay, so next week when you go out to bat, remember that, but then harness that in a good way. So I don't want to feel like that again. So next time I'm going to, and I had this catchphrase of focus, refocus before every single ball. So take that negative energy and turn to a positive energy, which made that they would then concentrate more, and they would learn from their mistake and say, okay, next time I'm going to put my front foot out, I'm going to put the bat to ball and have my head over the ball, all cricket stuff. But it was empowering them. It was giving them the tools to say, how do I learn from that, what he classified as the world coming to an end experience. So to me, it's having those conversations with kids at a young age to say, it's okay to feel sad. It's okay to feel cranky because you got out. But okay, so what are you going to learn from that? These aren't the conversations that are being had at school. These aren't the conversations that are being had inside families in a very generalist statement, because families are so busy, so, being pushed for time on so many levels through the demands of work and the demands of society and all of those things. I mean, but again, that's just personal opinion, but we're not focusing on the key things, and that's having a conversation.
And I think on top of that, I'd add that we're not focusing and allowing kids to feel a whole range of emotions. I always joke when people say, oh, I just want to be happy. Guilty. I've been there. In the past, I've said all I want to do is feel guilty, because being in long-term depression does that to you. And I'm like, I just want to feel happy again. And now when people say that, I joke and say, why would you want to limit yourself to one emotion or one feeling? There is a wide range of feelings. And so I always teach my daughter,
feel ecstatic, not just happy. I feel ecstatic.
Joy, ecstatic, and so there's a particular book that I really like, and it's called Permission to Feel. And it talks about the different range of feelings, emotions at different heightened states, and positive and negative. And what we did at home, particularly for my partner as well, is that when there's the red zone, the yellow zone, the blue zone, and the green zone, and it's about how heightened you feel in terms of an emotion and whether or not it's positive or negative. And I printed this chart out at home, and every day I'd ask my daughter when she was young to point at where she was, so we'd learned a new word about how you're feeling. And what we noticed within our particular household, as we were always quite low energy people, but tends to be on the mid to positive to the neutral side. And so we've allowed my daughter to actually point to the red zone and be like, okay, you're feeling really, really angry right now. Okay, that's a word. Livid is the word. What are we going to do about it? You don't need to suppress your anger, but you do
No,
not behave, propose any behavior that hurts other people. Okay, let's go bowling. Okay, let's go scream it out at the beach or something, or smash something, and or yell
have a
into a
punching bag
jar.
out the back and just go and beat into the punching bag.
You know,
Express that, acknowledge that emotion, express that emotion in a way that you are in control. It's not in control of you. And that's what's happening,
absolutely.
is that these emotions are controlling the kids as opposed to the other way around. I mean, you talk about books. There's one that and I've got to be careful how the subtle art of
Not giving
not
a
giving it.
F.
Yep. Most simplistic book in terms of way it's written, but one of the most powerful books that I've read purely from the point of view, and I will sum it up, is that we worry about all the wrong things. If I had to take something away, why am I worrying about this? Is it important to me? So I go back to my finding my north. I'm going back to my reflective. What's important to me? Why am I worrying about this? Is it on my dashboard? No. Then let it go.
I love that.
Stop
Yeah.
worrying about the things. Yeah. But we spend so much of our time worrying about what other people think.
I ask my daughter all the time, I go, okay, the importance of this particular issue. Will you care about it in 3 days? Will you care about it in 3 weeks? Will you care about it in 3 months or 3 years? And if it goes past the 3 months out, then we will debrief and say, okay, do we need to do something about it? If it's a 3-hour, 3-day thing or 3 weeks thing, we don't. Anything above, then we'd actually sit down. Kids especially, have a lot of for us as adults, and I would say back in like trivial matters like friendships and little fights and things like that, but to them at that particular moment it's really, really important, and it's
Absolutely.
important to sit down with them and be there for them. But look, we're at 2:05, so I wanted to particularly bring this conversation. See, Paul,
We could
I
talk
knew.
for hours, I know.
Yeah, we do this, but I really wanted to bring it back to the correlation between childhood trauma, your north, and physical health. And for those who are watching, your journey has, and being so vulnerable and real with us has given us a lot of insights into who you are, what you're currently doing, and what you will be doing in the future, because this is your north, as you've shared. I wanted to ask, what can each individual do, particularly with that interlink between physical health and mental health, as an individual?
I think it's very hard to put in a word, but the first thing is go and look in the mirror and reflect and talk to yourself and say, what is important to me? And until you can develop that stance within yourself, that then leads to having the confidence to then go and have those conversations and just educating yourself. I mean, if very quickly with the journey, once I was able to acknowledge and talk about the childhood sexual abuse, that then said, okay, I need to understand more about this. That led me to reading about what are the consequences of childhood sexual abuse, which led me to trauma, which led me to complex trauma, which then led me to understand that, it wasn't just fight or flight, there's fight, flight, freeze, and there's fawning. Wow, my God, what's fawning? Fawning is appeasing. Oh my God, that makes so much sense. What are some of the consequences of being in that appeasing mode? Well, it can lead to these potential things: borderline personality, dissociative identity disorder. So I then researched and went, oh my God, and it started to all make sense. And then said, okay, so what does this mean in terms of my physical health? So then I understood with fight and flight and all those, it's relating cortisol. What does that do? Raises blood pressure. So it was about educating myself. As I said, getting off the sideline, getting into the game. So part of it is to look in the mirror, reflect about what's real, who is the real you, what are the values, what's important to you, but then self-educate, because that then allows you to have those difficult conversations with the health and the mental and physical health people that we go and talk to, because unfortunately society is the way it is. They're not going to come to us. Yes. So it's about equipping yourself with the right information and the confidence and the strength to have those conversations. I keep coming back to words about normalizing those conversations, but the better equipped you are, the more resilient you feel about yourself. the better you feel about yourself, because you're actually starting to understand who is the real self. So
I
it's
want
that
to just,
self-reflective process
yeah,
that allows you to go there, which then allows you to say, okay, well, going back to the values, what am I not, what am I prepared to put up with? What am I not prepared to put up with? So I'm starting my own little battles and saying, okay, every time I go to hospital, a couple of weeks ago, I was in there on antibiotics because my diverticulitis was playing up, and I was lying in bed this morning going, my God, this has just dawned on me, and it really has. Every time I've gone to hospital, I've been released with no management plan. When I had most of my bowel taken out, there was no dietitian plan, there was no care plan, there was none of these things. You go, that's not good enough. So I'm educating myself continually to say, you know, when I go to hospital, before they let me out, I want to know, what should I do? What should I not do? How do I look after myself? Because they're the experts. I'm not supposed to know all these things. So again, it's about self-empowering, which is one of the, you know, again, one of the new buzzwords. But the more informed we are, the better we are able to have not only those conversations with the clinical side, but more equipped to have those conversations with ourselves.
and
So
others
again,
as
back
well.
to, you
Yeah.
know,
I also
if you're
want
not
to,
prepared to do that to someone else, but why you're prepared to do it to yourself. So again, it's empowering yourself to be strong and to start to love yourself.
yeah, I'd also like to add on top of that is during that path of self-education, you'll find different things, and you may not identify things that relate or not relate. And I just want to give people that permission, because I know that nobody gave it to me. It's that it's okay to change your mind if you no longer
Yeah.
relate to something, or you've learned something new and you're no longer aligned with it.
Yeah.
And that is completely okay. And so I just wanted to say thank you so much, Paul. I'm going to stop recording now, and I want to give Melissa an opportunity if she has any question. Is that okay with you,
Yeah,
Paul?
sure. Absolutely.